Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you are joining us from today. My name is John Mary. I am president of the Electric Grid Cybersecurity Alliance, and I'm very excited to serve as our host and moderator for today's webcast. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to have a really great session over the next hour. I'm going to start with a few housekeeping notes for you. You'll notice a few items here on the screen. First off, don't feel like you've got to scribble notes really quickly. We're going to email a recording of this whole presentation to everyone that registered. That'll come to you within 48 hours. We'll do a little bit of editing and cleanup. Please use the recording for your own reference, and definitely feel free to pass it on if you think of a colleague who would enjoy it. You can use the share widget in the console menu when you're watching the recording. So joining me today, I've got two outstanding experts to help us navigate our topic. Nicholas Johnson is the Chief Evangelist at Kahua, and Keshav Sarin is Director for Cybersecurity and Compliance Solutions at Guidehouse. And I'm going to give them both a quick chance to introduce themselves. Nicholas, let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. Nicholas Johnson with Kahua. I'm the Chief Evangelist, which means it's my job to go out into the marketplace and try to educate the world about the story, which is Kahua. We are a project management information system unlike any other, FedRAMP authorized, so the highest levels of security, which is the key topic for today. Would love to tell you more about that. You can find us at kahua.com.
Awesome. Keshav?
Hi, everybody. I'm Keshav Sarin, and I lead our cybersecurity and compliance solution group within Guidehouse's energy sustainability and infrastructure practice. I've been with Guidehouse for a little over 9 years. I've got a variety of roles that I played back from my telecom, engineering days to early days of .com and cybersecurity in various industries, including healthcare, energy, finance. Really glad to be here and talking with you all.
Awesome, fantastic. Well, we're really glad to have both of you here. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce our topic for today. And as you know, it's securing the future, protecting state and municipal projects from cyber threats. Now, state and municipal governments have been making a lot of great investments in technology over the last few decades. And those have been, the results of that have been extraordinarily positive. You've streamlined services, you've cut costs, you're making a whole range of things more convenient for constituents. There's so much of government service now that can be done online, and so much happening behind the scenes that is a lot more efficient and effective thanks to digital transformation and the application of all kinds of technology modernization. Now, the challenge is, as we were doing all of that modernization, there is a new problem that was kind of quietly growing in the background, and it's not so quiet anymore. And that problem is cybersecurity. The more systems that we have, the more we expand the attack surface of what we're trying to protect. And so, just a scan of the headlines for stories in the last 2 weeks, I found a few that were really troubling. So there's one large American city that just voted in an open city council meeting to allocate $7 million of new funds to help their city government recover from the aftermath of a cyber attack. We just saw yesterday the largest regulated water utility in the United States. That's an organization that serves 14 million people and 18 military bases was hit with a successful cyber attack. There was a hospital in Texas that was shut down by hackers. They had to divert patients to other centers to receive care, and it's in a fairly rural area, so that's not an easy thing to do. So whether you're talking about ransomware, DDoS attacks, website defacement, spear phishing, APTs, the list goes on. And so we're seeing a lot of new vulnerabilities. Now, the message that I take from this is pretty clear, which is if we're going to hold on to the gains of digital transformation, if we're not going to start sliding back off that cliff down to manual processes that we let go of 20 or 30 years ago, if we're going to keep moving government forward, we've got to solve this problem of cybersecurity. We've got to really nail this so that we're not in the news every other week with more and more of these successful attacks. So luckily, I've got two folks here who are just the people to help us really dig into trends, best practices, and even some great insights about compliance approaches like FedRAMP. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicholas to get our conversation started.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And Keishoff, I'm going to turn to you right away and ask you to tell us a little bit more before we get started, really. Tell us a little bit more generally about Guidehouse and the kind of work that you do, how a Guidehouse team helps advise on security matters. Just give us the kind of overview of what Guidehouse does and what your role is inside that organization.
Thank you, Nicholas. And Guidehouse was born out of PwC's public consulting arm in 2018, and ever since it has really morphed into I feel well-respected cybersecurity risk management and management consulting firm. Guidehouse made a major acquisition in 2019 of Navigant Consulting, more than doubling in size and really further solidifying itself as a good player in this market. Since then, Guidehouse has acquired Dovell Technologies and Grant Thornton's public sector advisory practice. I feel today we are a young, growing business of a significant employee base of around 17,000. Strong team with offices all over the world. If I were to show you from the top down, we have 4 practices: energy, sustainability, and infrastructure. That's where I belong. Then we have healthcare, finance, defense, and national security. And as I mentioned earlier, I lead our cybersecurity and compliance solutions in the energy, sustainability, infrastructure practice. Specifically for our client base, we serve clients such as energy companies. We support the top energy companies all over North America, Western Europe, federal civilian agencies. We support, again, majority of federal agencies, in fact, all of them. Anything basically out of defense and national security, because they have more rules and regulations, restrictions. So we have a separate team practice that supports that. And then my team supports state and local government agencies, whether these are all the major states, departments, agencies within each state, and then going down to local government such as munis, cities, and city departments. Some of the markets that we support, Nicholas, would be United States, obviously, in all these areas that are described, Canada, Western Europe, we have a big presence, and then Middle East. Again, we feel like we are still a growing company. We've grown a lot. We are, if not the top, one of the top in our size segment, and it's a great place to be here, helping our clients with all aspects of cybersecurity, security compliance, and all the fun that it involves.
Well, maybe it's the size, but I wanted to ask you, when as soon as you said you grew out of PwC's organization, I think I'm probably in the norm that I hear that and I think back to the days when I thought about the big 8, consulting firms, which I believe now are down to big 4, if the count is right. So I just wanted to ask, what makes Guidehouse different from that typical global consultant? You named a lot of things that you did. How are you different from those other monster agencies?
Good question. So one of the most important things that I feel distinguishes us from other firms of similar size are our people, right? Whether this is in critical infrastructure, that's what my background is, health, finance, defense, and national security. I feel we have built a team that come from these industries in a variety of roles. Specifically in my group, our team of cyber security experts were former federal leaders, state leaders, cybersecurity leaders, managers, analysts. We bring not just cybersecurity expertise, but also traditional management consulting experience with folks who are MBAs, JDs, analysts. On the technical side, we have people who might have 50 years of experience in the industry for critical infrastructure protection. We were just talking about one of our partners that has been with us for over 25 years, a leader in that space. But also we couple that with folks that are fresh, energetic, are motivated with cyber education, certification. It's a dynamic team. And what this dynamic team translates to is a broad spectrum of expertise to our clients. When we talk about cybersecurity problems, that's something that we did in our past lives. The other part of this is the quality of our work. And this is evident by among many things, the significant ratio of repeat work that we get from our existing clients. We take out the quality of our work very seriously and take pride in what we deliver. The last thing I would say that helps us be different from others is really a full spectrum, a 360 degrees of cybersecurity support for our clients. When it comes to cybersecurity, security compliance services, we provide really all aspect of it, whether that's a third-party assessment coming in, evaluating people process tools, or actually doing design, implementation, development services. But also when in times like the pandemic, where you needed staff augmentation, tools and technology, we have a whole group that is dedicated to digital services. So really, for some of these reasons, I feel that helps us differentiate from our competition.
That's excellent. I appreciate that. I think it actually helps our audience understand, it gives credibility to what we talk about today, to understand, the credibility that Guidehouse brings to the table. So thank you for that. Really, before we get started then, I want to learn a little bit about the audience. So we've got some poll questions we're going to bring up now. And I'll read these for those that might be looking a different direction. Which of the following describes your organization? Are you A, an architect engineer, B, general contractor, C, program manager, D, an owner or government entity, E, a subcontractor, or F, something else? We'll give the audience just a moment to tell us who they are, so we'll know a little bit more about who we're talking to today. It won't take long if you all could fill that out now. Keshav, I'll ask you to predict what's our audience going to be made up. Who's going to be the number one group here?
That's a very interesting question. If I'm going to guess, I think it'll be a good spectrum from folks who might be, from a government entity or subcontractor. My top three would be D, E, and B, and C.
All right, John, I'm going to bring you back in. Make a guess. Who's going to be the largest group?
I think, I don't know. I think it's going to be, it's hard to say. I'm going to go with, I'm going to pass on this one. I'm not sure.
Oh, come on, John. Give us a guess.
I think it's probably going to be project managers, maybe. I'm not sure. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to just go with the math and say subcontractors. And it looks like I am really wrong. Just considering there are more subcontractors than anything else, I thought that was my best guess, but I could not have been more wrong. All right. Lots of owners on the line today. So let's move to the next poll question then. How concerned are you about cybersecurity threats to your organization's infrastructure projects? Are you extremely concerned, somewhat concerned, or not concerned at all? Again, we'll give the audience just a moment to fill that out. I am coming to you all live today from the Project Controls Expo in Washington, D.C. I will tell you that the conversations I have make me think that people are extremely concerned. John gave us some really good examples as he teed up this question of why people should be extremely concerned. All right, let's take a look at what the numbers are coming in. I'm sure people are still voting. All right, as assumed. All right, last poll question. How would you rate your organization's current cybersecurity preparedness? Are you A, excellent, B, good, C, fair, D, poor, E, unsure? Again, one last question, if you folks could fill that in for us. Okay, let's see what the results are. All right. That's actually encouraging. So Good for us. And those numbers will continue to grow. You folks, that you can continue to vote. We'll leave the poll open for just a minute, but we'll move on now. Let's get to the heart of the conversation today. So we're all aware that cybersecurity risks and threats are prominent. Again, John, thanks for the great examples that teed us up here. We hear about them constantly. We've talked to many, I have personally talked to many cybersecurity professionals over the last several years. And I understand that my personal data has been breached over and over again. Based on the conversations I've had, I would easily bet that everyone's personal data is on the dark web somewhere, and that it's easy for us then to understand why this topic is so important. If our personal data is out there already, are we making too big a deal of all this? Why should we worry about our business data? So Keshav, I'll ask you that question. Are we making too big a deal, and why should we be worried about all this?
Well, Nicholas, you mentioned and I think John, you mentioned you looked at the past 2 weeks of information. Here is what I have a notification of a data breach that I had because one of the largest hospital data breaches that happened about a month ago. I have 2 of these data breach notices in my mail in the last month or so. It is really frustrating, right? It is. The question that you ask is should we be worried about it? Are we making a big deal? Well, let's shape this issue here. We are all dealing with something that is challenging. It's a complicated problem. Whether that's personal or for an organization, it is important to draw that distinction between an individual or a firm's impact and responsibilities related to cybersecurity challenges. It can feel futile receiving free dark web monitoring for your personal information. It is different for a business, an organization, where they need to invest versus an individuals. When we talk about dark web and our information being available and hacked, let's understand this a little bit. The dark web, or the places where you can obtain such information, it's a shady marketplace for stolen information, PII, intellectual property, process and procedures. They are openly available, bought and sold at these places. If your organization has experienced a data breach, there is a strong chance that your information could end up there. And there are various consequences, impacts of this, Nicholas, lead to financial losses, reputational, and or legal repercussions, right? Why this is important also because hackers and criminals can exploit the dark web to create fake versions of your company's website or social media accounts, which is completely client faces, customer user base facing. They can then use this to fish for customer information or damage your brand's reputation. It is important. Another reason it is useful and important to know if your user or your client's information has been compromised. Probing the dark web to find out if your user's credentials have been compromised can help you secure those accounts, right? And then why this is a big deal from a threat intelligence perspective. It is important to gather information about these hackers' methods, tools, activities. If it sounds like it overlaps with traditional threat gathering activities, it is. From a regulatory perspective, it is important for organizations, particularly those that are regulated, that have to comply with state, local or federal jurisdictions, not to talk about international jurisdictions, regulations. They have a significant responsibility to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of their systems. For critical infrastructure, that's where some part of my team supports, becomes very important because this information can be misused by bad actors to cause harm to our country's infrastructure. John, you mentioned in your life you used to work at a utility. It is this as well as I do. It is very important to make sure that some of the information pertaining to your critical infrastructure that might be available in the dark web could be IP addresses, asset names, network diagrams. These are things that could cause serious harm to your infrastructure. So Nicholas, I feel like there are several reasons why I don't consider that to be a big deal. Now, for an individual, I'll take a minute to talk about that. it is also important, right? And I highly recommend, for you to think about implementing credit freezes, and for you and your family. Everybody I've talked to has received a data breach notice and an offer of credit monitoring and freeze. Please seriously think about the risk for organization, businesses is completely different from an individual, and you have to manage both.
I received the same notification that you did 3 weeks ago. I'm sure it's the same company. So, yeah. And I saw a presentation this week. It struck me. 2 years, less than 2 years after the most recent U.S. fighter jet was aired, flew its inaugural flight, the Chinese came out with a almost identical plane. Less than 2 years later, it had technology that it had been invented in the process of creating the F-35. Less than 2 years later, the Chinese had the same one. It was determined that the plans for that plane were stolen, not from the manufacturer, but from a subcontractor. Access through, and it reminded me of the Target breach, which I believe was in 2013. And as I recall, that 100 million Americans had their data stolen because of a thermostat that was Wi-Fi enabled. Do I remember that story right? Do you guys remember that?
Yep. One of the biggest hacks.
Target was pretty.
So you've helped me understand the why for our industry, why we're so dedicating so many resources to these issues. Let's talk about the how now. What's the methodology that you advise helping your clients, assess, correct, prepare, and repair when something's happened?
Okay. So, as we've been discussing, organizations come in various shapes and sizes. Therefore, there are different challenges that require different responses. In our role at Guidehouse, we see organizations continue dealing with challenges to their, intellectual property or infrastructure and so on. Some of those examples that I'll share with you, Nicholas, vulnerability management, right? How do you make sure you have the bandwidth, both people, processes, tools, for either identifying, prioritizing, and really fixing them where they need to be fixed in a timely fashion. Data, we were just talking about data breaches that we hear almost every month, if not frequently. The challenges of identifying and protecting critical infrastructure data, critical data for your business, PII, especially the data that is managed by external parties like cloud providers. Once the data leaves your premise, you really don't know, unless you put some controls around it, where it goes. And then you bring in a challenge of having your third party, your external vendors, and the example that you gave with the Chinese coming up with a design of an airplane fighter jet that U.S. was developing, that probably was due to some sensitive, critical architecture plan being leaked out in some fashion. So these are all the kind of challenges that we do. One of the final challenges that I'll throw this in there, balancing what is needed for cybersecurity with what perhaps is needed to demonstrate security compliance. A lot of times we see cybersecurity obligations, while they grow, they are in challenge with and contention with what is required to demonstrate compliance. And sometimes compliance, trumps what's needed for cybersecurity. So finding a balance into how do you make sure that you maintain cybersecurity while demonstrating compliance. These are some of the challenges. So how do you address these? I'll say it, right up front, is there is no one size fit all here. We always suggest a defense in depth approach. Think about an appropriate combination of people, process, technologies at various aspects of the risk chain, if you will. Some of the things that I can suggest I've seen implemented, both from traditional cybersecurity hygiene, such as having a good cybersecurity strategy, as part of which you identify, you understand your cybersecurity risks. Many times we see organizations, Nicholas, take cyber actions, initiatives, without fully understanding how it fits into a broader cyber strategy. Mm-hmm. For example, everybody knows that it is good to have a vulnerability assessment or a pen testing, perhaps done by an external vendor or an audit. But how does that really fit into your overall cyber posture? That is really, really important. So a good cybersecurity strategy that helps a business understand what is important to you, what sort of business objectives you have, why is it important to you, where do you stand right now? Some sort of a baseline assessment using a good cybersecurity model like NIST 800-53 or the NIST CSF. What steps you are taking. To us, a cybersecurity strategy is a journey, and it will help you to know where you are on this journey and how your different initiatives fit toward that. So that's the one big, best practice that we always recommend. More tactically, I would say there's a lot of good data being generated, making sure that you tap into that data using analytics to monitor and manage security and compliance operations. One of the phrases that we always hear that there's a lack of a single pane of glass that gives you good visibility into your security compliance operation. So using data warehouse, data lake type solution to aggregate different data sources to give you a full picture, not just one aspect of cyber, but really a complete picture of your security posture. The other area I would say recently, there's been a lot of interest in generative AI or AI in general to use automation such as RPA, using predictive analytics and Gen AI to really predict, be better prepared, both from a preventative and detective side to reduce human errors, improve efficiencies in how you monitor security processes. So there's a lot of different things that organizations could do, Nicholas, and it is a struggle, but it can be done.
Yeah, that's great stuff. If you saw me looking down, I'm taking notes on what you're saying. This is really good stuff. So I wanted to ask, can you give me an example? I don't mean to put you on the spot. Can you give me an example of where your cybersecurity policy or procedure was contra to some compliance issue? You said sometimes those two things are juxtaposed against each other. Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah. So a lot of times in the utility space, there are requirements that either come from a state or from the grid operators, if you are an electric utility, or also from DOE agencies that require you to do certain actions at a periodic interval. That might be doing a risk assessment, or getting an asset inventory, or managing, reviewing security patches. I'll take an example of security patches, for example. A very common regulation that pertains to the electrical industry is being able to periodically identify security patches, being able to test or open up a mitigation plan for that particular security patch. Well, that particular regulation is very heavily focused on security patches, but really it should be about vulnerability. That really is the root of this, because not all vulnerabilities have a security patches. So if you are focusing on security patch for compliance purposes, you can check that box, but you may miss vulnerabilities that don't have a security patch. A lot of 0 days obviously are not going to be there yet. So to us, that's where it misses the mark. And then spending time on producing documentation pertaining to how you are managing security patches versus actually patching the vulnerability. Sometimes we see resource contention in the documentation part of this. I don't know if that addresses your question, Nicholas.
No, I certainly understand the tension between, trying to create good documentation for your procedures versus, performing your procedures. They both require resources. So, and the regulations, especially some that we'll talk about later, require an enormous amount of documentation. And I don't argue that that's wrong. I just recognize that it requires a lot of resource. So thank you for that. Actually, that's a good tee up for the next thing I wanted to ask you about. You've given us a lot of helpful data points about the roles of our mutual clients and what a consultant must play. But let's talk about the role and responsibility for technology providers like Kahua. So several years ago, Kahua achieved a security authorization called FedRAMP. And I think I've got a slide with some information. Let me forward that. Just some helpful links for folks. FedRAMP is the gold standard for cloud computing for cloud service providers. So I wanted to ask, just from your perspective, and I've just given my prejudiced answer, what's the value of achieving this standard?
A good question. So, let's understand a little bit about FedRAMP. I feel FedRAMP is a good standard that has foundation in well-established best security practices such as NIST 800-53, 800-37, FIPS. I think it is important to be compliant with FedRAMP for a variety of reasons. It provides a standardized approach to security, security assessment, authorization, continuous monitoring, especially for cloud products and services that the federal government uses. So it's required, and I think it does help you in that area. It also helps to ensure that any cloud solution that are implemented by a government agency, it's going to meet the federal government security, strict security requirements. As an organization, I think it also helps organizations like Kahua to enjoy some of the other benefits by becoming FedRAMP compliant. I feel like the overall purpose of these security regulations, including FedRAMP, is to improve security, right? So FedRAMP compliance, it helps organizations like Kahua to implement, again, a standardized security program across all its cloud services, preparing organizations to better respond and obviously prevent to these threats. Risk management is another good benefit for companies like Kahua. And then cost saving and because of process efficiencies. Those are important. Everybody is struggling with resources. There are different priorities that are helping us decide, which one to invest in. So FedRAMP, becoming FedRAMP compliant eliminates the need for perhaps too many levels of security review for each provider. It reduces the administrative costs, and it allows companies like Kahua to hopefully be more process efficient, being more nimble to that. So I feel like this is important.
Well, I can tell you, you mentioned it was very important to our business. We were sponsored through the process by the GSA. And for those that this is the first you've heard of FedRAMP, it's an authorization that was authored by the GSA and by the NIST. So they came together and they put together a standard for cloud service providers. Well, once you create a new standard, who has it? No one, because you just created it. So it actually took several years and before anyone in our business were able to provide it. Kahua became the first full-featured project management information system to achieve FedRAMP authorization. The GSA was our sponsor client and our first client. But since then, we now have dozens of federal agencies and projects that have acquired our system because of the FedRAMP authorization, because of the security standard that they all desired. It just wasn't available until we were able to cross that finish line. In order to achieve FedRAMP, Kahua had to create a completely separate physical infrastructure, different data centers from our commercial enterprises. And I recently learned that some non-FedRAMP authorized CSPs have rented space effectively in a FedRAMP authorized facility in an attempt to meet the requirement. From your perspective, would this achieve the same result for the client? And John, if you have experience with this as a former utility, if you have a thought about this, I'd welcome your input as well. But Keshab, what's your take on this?
Good question. In my opinion, it absolutely does not. If the cloud service provider, if the software solution is not FedRAMP, then the information that is being hosted is not being protected, in the same way that it should be. The facility keeps the data safe when it is at rest, but when the data is not at rest, and what happens when the data is traveling, I don't think it's a good approach. I think it's a bad attempt to bypass what is required for in that case.
You said earlier in your conversation, you said use the term once the data leaves your premises, it's vulnerable. And that's really, as I see it, the issue of a FedRAMP facility hosting a non-compliant software. Well, that's great as long as it's in the facility, but that's not what collaborative projects, that's not how we work, right? John, any other thoughts on that from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I would encourage the folks listening to make sure you're careful in how you ask those questions in procurements, because a lot of times what happens is a procurement asks about a certification like FedRAMP in a very general way. And so, somebody might respond, like you said, where maybe one component of their solution is FedRAMP certified. Like they have 25 pieces of it. One of them's FedRAMP certified. So they may slap that logo and say yes, but you've really got to make sure that, you're asking that question to say, is your complete solution certified? How did that work? How did you earn your certification? And really test them on some of the things that means, because I've definitely seen vendors overstating the level of certification that they've accomplished, and that's dangerous. So great point, Nicholas.
John, what checks are in place for this, or how does it get corrected if, because it's a serious issue if the agency has said and their intention is to keep data at this level of security, and if we know that's not being met because the software is not compliant, how do we correct the situation?
So, that's a tough thing to do, and a lot of government entities are putting themselves at much more risk than they realize, because they're representing to the people they are accountable to that they've gotten this certification, they've asked these questions, and they've gotten this. But I think what you need to, where that can get tested, as you're saying, and corrected, is in audits that happen after the fact. So you may have folks come back, audit a contract, and then you have to uncomfortably tell your management team or your board or your stakeholders, hey, we thought these guys were safe and they're not. We didn't do our homework. And it's very typical, it's very common that large projects, construction projects, IT projects are going to go through some auditing process outside of the city or government entity's control. And if they ask the right questions and we didn't, we're in trouble.
Kishab, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I totally support what John has said. I look at these controls, these checks, as both preventative and detective. And I think audits are an example of detective checks after the fact, after the projects have begun. But I think there could be a preventative portion to this as well, where to prevent this from getting worse, perhaps this should be reviewed and monitored by industry watchdogs or properly authorized institutions. But I think there are different levels of controls and checks and balances that we can put in.
Well, so I have up on the screen links for FedRAMP's basic website, where you can learn a little bit about more under that program basics link. If you'd like to see in the FedRAMP marketplace what solutions are authorized, that's the second link there. So I would mention that Kahua is really proud to have also achieved StateRAMP authorization. StateRAMP is actually based from a nonprofit. The nonprofit was spun up so that to help state organizations and local governments to be able to have the same levels of security that FedRAMP authorizes without having to be in a federally secure facility. So StateRAMP is brought up by a nonprofit organization. You can find information for that also simply by Googling StateRAMP. You'll see that now 28 states have adopted StateRAMP. John is in Texas, where, of course, everything's bigger, and they have created their own version of StateRAMP. It's called TexRAMP. Kahua has achieved TexRAMP as well. So there are I think Arizona as well has their own slightly different version. The other 26 states, if I'm correct, all use just StateRAMP, authored again out of a nonprofit that wants to help states and local governments achieve that. So you'll see cities and counties now beginning to require this same kind of security measure because our data is that important. Keshav used the term journey earlier, and I love the fact that as a FedRAMP provider, we are constantly audited. And FedRAMP is a constantly evolving security standard. What good is a standard that we set today if it doesn't get updated every day? Because cyber criminals, hackers are working their best every day to undo what good we've done. So good information for you folks to have. Okay, I want to ask about this newer requirement. I just previewed a little bit on the next slide, which is perhaps the most talked about topic among DoD contracting community that for the last 6 months that I've been to so many different industry events. And it's this, it's the new requirements called CMMC. It stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And this is, as I understand it, a requirement for DoD contractors going forward, beginning at the end of this year, beginning of next year. Keshav, what do you know about CMMC, and is Guidehouse helping your clients obtain this certification or advising on where to go find this information?
That's correct. So CMMC stands for Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, as you just heard. It's a major program from DoD that helps ensure that the industry meets cybersecurity requirements. It particularly, aims to enhance the protection of controlled unclassified information. In my opinion, some of the goals for this program would be how to protect sensitive unclassified information that is shared by the agency with the contractors and their subcontractors. How to ensure that industry meets cybersecurity requirements for systems that process this uncontrolled information. Increasing accountability in the cybersecurity assessment process. How to fasten up and speed up the adoption of mature cybersecurity practices. How can somebody be more mature in this journey that we've been talking about? And then finally, preventing false compliance claims. The new version of CMMC 2.0 program has 3 different levels of maturity. As a maturity model, you can always imagine that there's going to be different categories and levels. Not everybody has to be level, the highest level, but it is a journey to get there. So there are 3 levels for CMMC: level 1, 2, and 3. And the requirement, practices, maturity expectations, they increase in rigor from level 1 through level 3, with level 3 being the most rigorous, as you can imagine. And it's good to know that CMMC 2.0 program also better aligns with the requirement that we all are used to in the NIST space, in the NIST cybersecurity standards. So I think it's a really good initiative to help industry be compliant with what is expected. And at Guidehouse, in our defense and national security practice, we do work in this area.
Okay. I recently heard a DoD procurement officer did not want to be identified, but was concerned. He stated in a group meeting that he was concerned that when CMMC comes into play next year, when it begins to be enforced, that he could lose 30 to 50% of his eligible bidders. Because the process, as I understand, to obtain the certification, could take, I've seen different estimates. I saw an estimate that was 3 to 4 months for the easiest level, 10 to 15 months for level 2, and up to 18 months for level 3. I've also talked to another provider that actually helps clients work through this authorization or this certification. They said that don't tell anyone less than a year for any of these levels. So it's a rigorous process. It's going to be exhaustive and expensive for the subcontractors. And I can see why the procurement officer was concerned, because there are only 55 companies that can help with this certification process right now. There are at least 80,000 subcontractors in the DoD community. So it's a serious issue. We've done our best. It is not something that Kahua helps with. The process is not something that Kahua helps with, the certification, I should say. But we're doing our best to help the industry understand that this is something you have to get ready for. It's being rolled out. The one thing that we can advise or be of assistance in that having a FedRAMP compliant solution for your project management does fast track a bit the work of CMMC. So if you're using a FedRAMP authorized tool, you already have much of the security measures in place, and you have the documentation for those that CMMC is going to require. So I've listed some information there about cyberab.org. This is the only and official accreditation body for CMMC. If you want to find one of those 55 certification consultants, you will find them there. If you want to find one of the third-party audit organizations, you'll find them there. Do a quick search. You can find both of those. You can't have the same company be both, of course. You can't audit the work that you did. So I hope that's helpful to our contractor audience today. All right, a couple more things, and then we'll take some questions. So Kahua is still a relatively small company, but we felt the need to have a chief information security officer and created that position within our organization. Hishab, do you advise your clients on how they should staff for cybersecurity? Are there kind of rules of thumb that you follow based on the size or nature of their business? What's your advice to your client base?
That's a really good question, Nicholas. Yes, we do. Advising on the org structure for cyber organization is a big part of what we do. In a perfect world, Nicholas, every company would have a CISO, because almost every company deals with technology these days. And if you have any technology component to your business, you are at a cybersecurity risk, whether you know about it or not. By using technology, you are exposed to that risk. To us, a role of CISO has become critical to the operation of an organization, regardless of their industry and size. But we do understand, a small, medium-sized business may not be able to justify a dedicated CISO. In those cases, it could make sense for the CIO, if you have one, or a senior IT staff to take on responsibilities, assuming they are prepared and trained and able to do so. Sometimes, folks leverage external consultants like ourselves to provide, targeted guidance and CISO level support. On the IT side of the house, I think we see, organizations find themselves using internal IT professionals who are primarily focused on operations, but then they've been given responsibilities to deal with cyber, and it's like, hey, IT analyst, can you take it off, cyber for me? 30 years ago, when back in my early days in technology, that's how I got the cyber hat. There was nobody else, and I took the opportunity and learned about cyber. And I wasn't very experienced in cybersecurity 30, 35 years ago, and I learned. And we still see that sort of effect where folks from technology, IT, development organizations have been given these roles, but they have little experience performing these kind of cyber work. Right. There are several factors, Nicholas, that play a big role in how you staff it. Most importantly, like I mentioned, the cyber strategy portion of this, understand the kind of risk that an organization must manage. Understanding what are your business objectives, what is the technology component, what is your internal maturity. Before you ask an IT staff to do this, make sure you understand you manage to that maturity. Compliance is a big part of this. You asked about rules of thumb. I think it can be a deceiving approach sometimes because of the variability in all of these areas that are described. You really have to know. Talking about compliance and regulations, they're a large driver for what you have to do for your minimum investment in cybersecurity. At the end of the day, I would say dedicating some staff with singular focus on cybersecurity is a best practice. How large that staff is, whether you need a leadership, the tools and technology are dependent on the factors that I mentioned. That has to be tailored to that organization. I applaud Kahua in investing in that role because of the kind of function that you perform. I think it's a great step. I'll go back and make another pitch for if you want to improve cybersecurity, it can only be achieved when a holistic approach is adopted using a cybersecurity strategy. Finally, it comes down to having a security team. Whether you have a CISO role, whether you can afford or not, you should have a security team, a person or a group of individuals that are responsible for management, oversight of information security. That to us is crucial. Having a strong CISO, like as Kahua did, I think is one of the most important tasks that will help you in your overall cyber security strategy, and it will help you protect your business, protect your data.
The thing that I heard you say over and over again is have a strategy. Know where you want to go. And I imagine that's something that Guidehouse would love to help organizations achieve, is to help consult on that. Because we go into business not to create a security strategy. We go into business to create widgets or provide service. It's not the core of what most of us do. And I imagine, though, that, as you said earlier, you have a team that is what they think about. They wake up every day thinking, living and breathing, how do we help protect our clients? So.
Yep. And you saw that, in the poll that you did earlier, right? The majority of people feel good about it. So We see that people feel good about where they are, but sometimes they don't know where they reside in the strategy. Most times they don't even have one.
Yep.
So we come in and help map out the journey for them, understand what elements of cyber strategy exist. So yeah.
All right, we're going to take some questions from the audience, and the first one asks us to go back to the basics. There is a Category 5 hurricane barreling back towards Florida. What are some of the things that an owner organization, a government agency, or an individual needs to do to prepare for that kind of physical damage that can affect your cyber infrastructure? Again, this is probably back to the basics. Like, what are some of the things that we need to do just to protect our data from a physical catastrophe?
I'll take a stab at it, because this is very near and dear to what we do. Part of our client base are utilities, energy companies that are in region. Actually, one of our large clients is in Florida and having to deal with back-to-back hurricanes. Like I mentioned before, there is a defense in depth approach, right? Obviously, you don't control the weather patterns, and as and when the hurricane would come, you have to respond to it. But you can do a lot to be prepared for it and be proactive. So one of the solutions that we've been building for our clients based out of Florida, and really how they manage hurricane risk. In fact, if I were to generalize this, Nicholas, I would call it, this is one of the tools in your risk management tool set. The storm risk is a kind of risk that you're trying to prepare for. So one of the solutions that we've built for them is using analytics and AI to really understand a good asset inventory using GIS information and NOAA overlays to really track the path of the storm and which regions and facilities and assets it is going to impact. That is one of the biggest things that it allows them to know what is in the path of the storm, and what from there then you can decide what activities they need to take proactively, whether those are cybersecurity, responding, being prepared for response. So a lot of companies don't have a good GIS overlay of where their data centers are. So that was one of the big things that we help them prepare on a preventative side. Having a good op model on how they respond to a hurricane like that. Those are some of the things that I can talk about being more prepared for it. Being able to at a push of a button, understand what would be your risk exposure if the hurricane were to take a path down to your data center location. That's a big.
Yeah, perhaps that's the topic for our next GovTech webinar. We at Kahua, we love talking about asset information, because a big problem, a huge problem in our industry is that we finish construction activity and projects and we turn over asset information in a way that an owner cannot use it. So Kahua's found a way to solve that problem. That will be the topic for the next webinar, I suppose. But we've solved a way to solve that so that when you open up your asset, your facility, you don't have to fly blind while you rebuild an asset database. So we can fix that, but we'll talk about that next time. John, any thoughts from you? You've worked at a utility, critical infrastructure, and you've had to deal with hurricanes and other kinds of storms before. Any just quick thoughts on that?
Sure. I'll throw one more thing into the mix there, which is to encourage folks, especially people that are operating critical infrastructure like utilities, to move as many of their systems to the cloud as they reasonably can. And I know that's probably a scary concept for a lot of people. Their assumption is, I've got more control if this is on premise, and I've got more ability to be secure because I can control all of that thing. Control is not always correlated with reliability and resilience. And so getting your systems out into the cloud, yes, it's a little further from the people you've got who've got hands on keyboard, but it also means that even if your office is entirely offline, you're still operating. And so there's critical systems like that. A lot of the large cloud providers, their backup strategy is having 4 or 5 copies of your data in 4 or 5 different physical locations, so that if one goes offline, the others keep running. I don't want to see, and unfortunately I've seen this happen to a lot of utilities. during Hurricane Beryl, this happened to a lot of the utilities in the Houston area. You cannot have the outage map that your customers use to figure out if the power's on go down because your data center's flooded. Like that's just not acceptable. So I think in a lot of ways, we've got to get out of the on-premise IT management business as much as the regulators will let us do.
I have often said,
I would, sorry to interrupt. I would add, I think the question was also alluded to the states, the role of states in this as well. Did I have that right?
Yes.
So I think, some of the things that I and John have talked about is more on the role of what organizations, that operate these critical infrastructure. But I think states also have a role to play in this, right? They have the monitoring capability or access to information to allow organizations, including themselves and their agencies, to be better prepared on this. And from a preventative perspective, incentivizing the industry or the department agencies to either run drills or emergency, scenarios to know. And the example that John was giving, what if your data center is flooded? What if the RS map is not available? Right. Really take good operational scenarios to have a drill on being prepared when these natural disasters occur.
Good, great points. There is place for oversight. I am inclined to say one of the things that makes that is good for all of a customer of a solution provider like Kahua, because we've achieved FedRAMP. We had to go through over 300 security steps, basically a checklist of items that was 327 items long, I believe. We had to accomplish that in order to achieve this status. Well, it's not like we did it and don't take advantage of that for our commercial customers as well. So the things that we do for FedRAMP and StateRAMP are also provided for our commercial clients as well that do not purchase into a FedRAMP or StateRAMP facility. So it's really a nice badge of honor to carry that, because it carries over to everyone that we serve. And to John's last point, I would always tell a customer, we are probably, I don't know anything about your infrastructure, but we probably, in all likelihood, have a much better chance of keeping your data safe and secure than your own team can, because it is what we get up and think about every day. And you get up and think about providing water to your customers, or paving roads in your district, or building widgets in your factory. We get up and think about how can we help keep your data secure and more efficient. So, all right, we've got time. Just one last question that came in. How many states are using StateRAMP? I believe I answered that before. There are 28. Do all federal agencies now require FedRAMP? No, absolutely not. But I can tell you that the list grows fast. The GSA was our first customer, and we now, as I said, have dozens of federal projects and customers. And I know that StateRAMP map 2 years ago had 14 states that were requiring StateRAMP, and now it has doubled in the less than 2 years. So with that, gentlemen, I am really, really happy to have had this conversation with you. I believe our time's up, though. So, John, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right. Well, thank you both for your time and your insights today. I mean, great discussion, and I love how organically we were able to take this, and how much we were able to kind of handle the questions from the audience. If you didn't get your question answered, no worries. You're still going to have contact information to be able to get a hold of folks. As I mentioned, you're going to get a full recording of this live webinar in your inbox within 48 hours. And so we really appreciate you coming in here today. So I want to be respectful of our time commitment. We'll wrap up here. Again, thank you to Keshav and Nicholas for their support. Big thanks to Kahua for making it possible for us to have this really important discussion today. And most of all, thank you to the folks in the audience. Thank you for taking the time out of your day. We know you have very busy day jobs. If you need to access a certificate of attendance for continuing education or something like that, please click on the certificate widget in the console menu. We look forward to seeing you again soon on another government technology and governing webinar. Have a great day, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.